But hello, everyone. Welcome to this AI session, the third of this year's Edtech Startup Festival run by Brighteye Ventures. I'm Rhys, Brighteye's head of research. Brighteye, in case you're not familiar with us, is the most active Edtech investor in Europe, specializing in the early stages, writing checks of $250 up to $5 million. You may have heard a bit about our thesis earlier today from Ben Wers, one of our founding partners, but if not, you'll be able to catch up with that when we do the roundups of the event. The theme for this session, as you'll have seen, is what's happening at the leading edge of AI. We have a really brilliant lineup with the founders of some of the most exciting companies in global EdTech joining us. We'll do short Q&As with each founder, and then we'll jump into a bit of a panel session. So you're very welcome to share your questions, your thoughts throughout. We'll keep an eye on those, so please send them through to the Zoom chat. Before we introduce the speakers, we wanted to introduce an AI strand of our research that we are pre-launching today and formally launching next week. And Sabrina Bakenya from the Brighteye team is here to tell you a little bit about it.
Great, thank you so much, Rhys, and hello, everyone. So today I want to give you a sneak peek into the blog series that we have been working on and that we will officially announce and launch next week. So this particular series focuses on, or rather consists of multiple blogs that delve essentially into the impact that AI is having across 3 educational stages, namely K-12, higher education, and vocational learning as well. And then following this series, we will also introduce a thought piece on AI in corporate environments. So I think we can all appreciate that AI is quite the game changer, but how exactly AI-powered tools are reshaping education is a bit more complex because its potential is not just about making learning more efficient or more engaging. It's really about fundamentally altering how educators teach, how students learn, and then also how administrators manage educational institutions. But let's be clear, while AI has and offers immense potential, its adoption in educational institutions isn't as straightforward. There are financial constraints, complex decision-making processes, there are powerful incumbents in this space, and differing priorities across K-12 higher ed and vocational learning that present many challenges for startups. And so over the next few weeks in these blogs, we will explore these challenges in more detail. We'll look at the evolving AI landscape via a series of market maps, and then also touch on the winning plays and strategies that we see some startups using to find success when building in the educational space. We will also share perspective on the types of AI tools that we could see being built down the line as AI becomes more prominent and more integrated in education. So we hope you'll join us as we explore these topics in this blog series. And thank you so much again for your time. I'll hand it back to Rhys.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sabrina. And you can keep up to date with that work at brighteyevc.com or on our social media channels, particularly on LinkedIn. Anyway, without further ado, let's meet the founders. We are delighted to have Emilia Molimpakis, CEO and co-founder at Thymia, joining us today. Emilia, we'd love to hear more about your background, how Thymia came to be, and what you aspire for the organization.
Great, thank you so much, and hey everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Really exciting to hear a bit more about what everybody else is doing as well. But I can tell you a bit more about myself. So I'll start maybe by what we're doing at Thymia, and then that will lead me back to kind of the starting point of Thymia. So at Thymia, we use AI-driven analyses of voice, video, and behavioral data in order to assess and measure mental health conditions, but also their core symptoms. So we focus specifically on things like major depression, generalized anxiety, ADHD, and then symptoms including fatigue, mood changes, appetite loss, anhedonia or loss of interest or pleasure, and so on. The way we actually engage with users is through gamified activities. So we have various protocols we've designed that are gamified, and this basically elicits voice, video, or behavioral data for us to analyze. In terms of the voice aspect, just to kind of explain a little bit more, that includes both acoustic properties of speech, so intonation changes, loudness levels, friction, how you control your vocal cords, but also content. So what exactly are you saying? The words, the meanings, the structures, complexity, and so on. The second modality is video. This is everything we can pick up from a smart device camera. It can be your eye gaze pattern. So where are you looking on the screen? upper body movements, head angle, facial micro expressions, and so on. And finally, behavior is basically a broad category to signify everything else we pick up, from reaction times in the games to typing behavior, mistakes, and so on. So Thymia basically has voice, video, and behavioral data collection through gamified activities. The way Thymia actually came to be was through my background. So before founding Thymia 4 years ago, I was a researcher for about 12 years. I spent most of that time at UCL here in London. I did a PhD and several postdocs in neuroscience and linguistics. I worked with various patient groups, started Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, moving into schizophrenia and depression, but for all of them doing the exact same thing, which is basically using language use, so seeing how they sound and what they say when they speak, to use that basically as a biomarker for cognitive function. So it's really powerful. You can see decline, you can see response to treatment through it. I absolutely loved my research, and then everything changed quite literally overnight for me when my best friend developed depression, and I saw her try to get help in the NHS. First, she saw a GP, then she saw a specialist, she then went privately. Unfortunately, nobody realized how bad her condition was until it was actually too late for her. Just 2 days after seeing her psychiatrist, she tried to take her own life. And when that happened, I was the one who found her at her house, which, as you can imagine, is very much that life-changing moment. It's very fortunate. It's the reason she's still with us today, but also very unfortunate. It should never have happened. But it was also the starting point for Thymia, because ultimately her clinician and many other mental health clinicians said the same thing to me, which was, as clinicians, when we are seeing someone, we have two tools in our arsenal, which is observation and questions. So if the person in front of us can't answer the questions, they don't want to, or they're culturally kind of inhibited, there isn't really anything else we can do. And so that's why Thymia came to be. And that was kind of 4.5 years ago. And this is where we are now. So it's being used by clinicians in clinical contexts, and also in wellness contexts by wellness providers as well. So that's a bit about us.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that, and of course for the incredibly powerful founding story. Next up, we have Husayn Kassai, CEO and co-founder at Quench.ai, and also previously a co-founder on Fido. Husayn, we'd love to hear a bit more about your background, how Quench came to be, and of course what you're hoping the business will achieve.
Of course, it's very good to be here. Quench is my second company. My first startup, I started with two friends at university called Onfido Identity Company. We grew it to be a unicorn and about 500 people by the end of 2020, which is the point at which we brought in a new CEO. And I really enjoyed the journey. I just felt that we were letting the team down, and that up until the first 100 or so people we hired, we did a good job of identifying those who wanted to learn more, achieve more, and we basically invested in them, mentoring, coaching, all the support they needed wherever we could, and they ended up flourishing and becoming the backbone of the company. But then after the second, third 100 person and so forth, it just became increasingly difficult. And I felt that as we're scaling, our productivity is going down. And speaking to other founders, speaking to investors, I said, yeah, this is just the way it is. And I could see it. But I just continued to scratch my head saying, like, why is this? And I recognize that there are a few reasons, but a key part of it is this ability to help people develop is one, but secondly is complexity in information. But if you go from 10 to 100, you're not 10xing your information, you're probably 20, 30, 40xing your information. And those problems stayed with me. And as an AI company, I recognize that AI can sort of play a role. So I took a break, and for the last 2 years, I've been working with Quench, where we basically have two products. Our first product, which is our main product, can be best thought of as a Perplexity.ai, but for internal content. So we digest an organization's internal content, and we make it queryable, so that anyone with any queries, they run it, and then we just pull the relevant bits. Primarily, so we're API first. And we principally work with Edtech, so in training providers, as well as professional services and sort of for the workforce developments. The second product is an AI coach product, where quite frankly, it's not a good product. And so we're going to come back and do a better job of it in a year's time. And I know we can, when we get into the Q&A and sort of deeper discussion, I can talk a lot about that. But on the core product, it's helping people on the floor of work find the sort of insights they need to be able to work better. And it's a horizontal application across an organization. And yeah, I think that's a bit of an overview. Naturally, there are many reasons why Gen AI now helps us do what we do and helps this become a sort of a frictionless experience, which is what's so exciting about today's Zoom call.
Brilliant, brilliant. And very excited to hear more about the coach stuff in due course. I'm sure your standards for what's exciting are very high given your background. So yeah, I'm sure we're all looking forward to that. And last, but of course certainly not least, we're very pleased to have Catalin, Voss, CTO and co-founder at Ello, joining us today. Catalin, the floor is yours. We'd love to hear more about your background, Ello, and why you started the business.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, so Ello is creating an AI teacher, which, yeah, I think many companies are now sort of chasing that dream. But what's interesting, it was sort of actually one of the original dreams for AI, right? I was sort of talking to one of our advisors, like Terry Winograd, is like the machine that teaches the child was sort of one of the visions. And of course, it never happened because in the 80s, we've lacked the tools to be able to scale up one-on-one tutoring, which we know is the most effective way of teaching to sort of human level with technology. And I think it's becoming fairly evident that AI is giving us the tools to be able to scale that impact now, and to try to give every child their perfect one-on-one teacher. And so we are starting to do that with reading by building an AI reading coach. And we're starting with reading because it's a foundation of everything else. You learn to read, and then you read to learn in the information age. And it's in the US, it's a national, and really it's an international crisis. I mean, in the US, 69% of fourth graders are not proficient readers. And that's crazy because these kids just sort of move on to the next phase of school where they're expected to read without the skills necessary to be able to just read, master that itself. And so that's why we're starting there. So we built Ello, which is an elephant, basically. It's a reading coach elephant who sits there and listens to you read out loud. I've got this is not what Ello looks like, but some kid sent us this behind me. And basically, he sits there, listens to you read out loud, and helps you when you get stuck, motivates you to keep going, awards you stars and prizes, and then tries to inspire a love for reading. Yeah, and so I guess for my background, I'm on the technical side. As you mentioned, CTO. I grew up in Germany and came to Silicon Valley as a kid for an internship, and then moved here to go to Stanford and met my co-founder Tom my first year there a little bit over 10 years ago, and started working with him on a company in child development. Built a small Edtech business that got acquired while we were still in college, and then have pretty much ended up working on trying to build good stuff with AI since then. We built a learning aid for autistic kids. I started a company in Kenya where we have an office now, the financial inclusion space, and then returned to Edtech when Tom came calling after he had quit his job running Edtech stuff at Google with our third co-founder, Dr. Elizabeth Adams, who's a clinical child psychologist. And they've been sort of toying around on different ideas, and we joined Y Combinator together, started working on a different business originally, which didn't work out. And then 2020, schools shut down, and Elizabeth had a 6-year-old daughter at the time, Lily, who sort of sat next to her in her home office, trying to learn to read. And needless to say, that didn't work very well over Zoom. And yeah, we thought we could do better. She was getting calls from all of her friends and family asking her, as the psychologist friend, hey, what apps should I download? What can I do? And we looked at everything out there, and we didn't find anything that we thought was super compelling, because everything out there was reading to the kid as opposed to asking the child to do the reading. And so we started on that thesis. Hey, can we make child speech recognition that can lead the child to do the reading? Lily became our first customer, our sort of chief kit officer, our chief playtester, and yeah, of course, the opportunity has only gotten bigger since then, and now Lily's helping us bring it to the rest of the world.
Awesome, awesome. How old is Lily now?
Gosh, she's 9. Yeah.
9. Wow.
Yeah.
That's it. We love the personal stories. Thank you very
10.
much for
She's 10.
sharing them.
She's 10. I'm sorry. Oh God. Yeah.
So you can hopefully hear we have a really interesting set of founders on the call today, focused on very, very different challenges, and here to share their perspectives with you and of course to answer any queries you have as we go. But we'll jump into a first couple of questions with Emilia now. So we'd love to get your perspectives, Emilia, on a couple of questions. So as we've discussed before, your use of AI for mental health diagnostics is groundbreaking. That's very clear from the companies that you're working with so early on in your own company's journey. We'd love to hear a bit about the challenges you faced when developing the AI models that can reliably interpret data from the games and voice analysis you're putting together in the process of assessing mental health.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I just realized I'm really zoomed in for some reason. I don't know what Zoom is doing. I swear I'm not sitting that close to the screen.
I'll come closer to the screen. There you go.
Sorry, I'll move it back. So I guess, yeah, when training our own kind of proprietary AI models to do what we're trying to do, we were faced with, I guess, 3 key challenges. One was actually, well, it's all about how you train the models, but the first was about the ground truth that you're training the models against, which is definitely a very big challenge, and I'll go into each one separately. The second was around identifying what we're actually looking for. So what is the signature for the mental health condition and symptom, rather than any other confounding variable that is affecting those same modalities we look at. And then finally, it was about getting enough data to do this properly and to do it justice and allow for those confounding variables, basically. But on the first one, this was probably like the hardest one to solve, which is how do you train an AI model when you don't really have a ground truth to train it on? So to give you an example, in physical health, say when you're trying to use an AI model to identify cancer or something like that, you typically will start, say, lung cancer. You'll start training the model by showing it kind of thousands, if not like hundreds of thousands of pictures where there is very specifically a lung cancer mass that the AI is being shown, that's been labeled by a clinician. This is associated with cancer. When it grows, cancer gets worse. When it shrinks, cancer gets better, the patient gets better. So there's a very specific ground truth to train it on, and eventually it learns and it gets better. The actual problem with what we're trying to do is exactly that there is no ground truth, and the very subjective nature that we're trying to overcome creates a bit of a barrier there. If the clinician themselves or the patient doesn't know what the ground truth is, how are you training the model, basically? So to overcome that, we need to basically triangulate and do what nobody actually had ever done before, which was pull in as much information from as many sources as you can to actually establish what the ground truth is, and then train the models based on that. So we had the clinician's opinion, the self-reporting from the clinician, basically, of whether the patient is getting better. So you get more evidence of the condition. The patient themselves reporting whether they are getting better. The fact that they have no other condition, it's just the one condition. Any other physical inputs we could get, such as amount of sleep, time since sleep, adding in things like step count, all those different things, basically, all are getting you closer and closer to the ground truth. And then we train the models against that, which is very complex, very time consuming and quite expensive to do. But that was like the biggest challenge, I would say. The next thing that you end up having to deal with, which probably Catalin also has, is when you're dealing with voice data, it's not just about the content of what people are saying, it's also about the how they're saying it. And that is impacted so much by somebody's accent, their age, their birth sex, their like first, second, third language, cultural background, ethnicity, everything comes into play with voice, but also with face and your behavior. And those things very much overshadow most of the time the signal, which is mental health. So you need to be able to take out that signal, which is age, birth, sex, etc., to focus in on the actual, the ground truth of that mental health condition. So that was also a really big thing, getting enough labels from each individual so we can cancel all of that out. And because of those two like really big challenges, we actually needed not just dozens of data points like from individuals, which you usually see in the literature. People do like maybe 50, 60 people, 100 people, 200 people. We've gathered now over 12,000 individuals, like thousands and thousands of hours of data from individuals longitudinally, so that actually we're building models that adapt to the user, rather than actually finding age or sex through language, and through face, etc. So I would say those three were the biggest challenges to overcome. We're still overcoming them. So yeah.
That is fascinating, and all things I didn't know. So hopefully it was as insightful for the audience as well. And because of what you're working on is so groundbreaking regarding the triangulation of different data and reference points. Did you find that building trust with your partners, to trust your model, to trust what you're sort of presenting to them, as being viable, a challenge, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think it's so it's been very interesting. We've kind of gone through the whole, I would call it roller coaster of people initially not trusting AI, then be like, oh my God, AI, then be like, oh, actually, no, I don't like AI that much anymore. And so we've kind of like ridden that whole roller coaster. The one good thing with trying to sell to mental health professionals or well-being providers, etc., is that we don't need to educate them on the need for more objective measurement tools. It's something they are desperate for. What you need to kind of convince them on is like to trust what you are doing, especially when you're talking about triangulating and finding a ground truth, essentially, that they themselves may not always identify correctly. Actually, there's a shocking statistic about GPs that they get mental health condition assessments wrong more than 70% of the time. So how are you going to convince them that you're doing it better, essentially? But the way we found is, like you kind of go about it in different ways. One is scientific credibility and clinical credibility of the team. We're in a very good position, very lucky to have world-leading experts on the team. Together, the whole team has over 250 publications that are relevant publications. We're now recognized as world leaders in this particular space, which is great. It always, like, that helps. But it's also about actually translating that into something that is understandable for the mental health professional. So I talked about subjective questions. There are questionnaires that are the gold standard. We are actually, when we present our results, we present them alongside those questionnaires. They don't feed into our results, but we present them alongside, and we say, okay, here's ours, the Thymia outputs, and here's the PHQ, the GAD, etc., all the other questionnaires. You as a doctor can choose whichever one you want to go with, and you can compare. And there's a lot you can do through looking at both. One interesting thing we found is that culturally, people will over share how they feel, or will play it up, or they'll play it down. So in the US, people play it up a lot. They say they're doing a lot worse than they are. In India or Asia, it's the opposite, which is very interesting and helpful for the doctor. And the last thing, which is really, really relevant, is we don't come in saying we're going to replace you. We're going to do your job better. It's, we are another measurement tool to add to your arsenal. You choose whether and how to use us. It's thinking about it like a blood pressure cuff, but for mental health. And that, positioning it that way, actually has meant that people trust us a lot more than a lot of our competitors. So it's about kind of a commercially speaking, like a nice kind of way of building a relationship alongside that clinical and scientific credibility to back you up. And that has been a winning combination thus far. I'm sure we'll have struggles, but that's worked thus far.
That's incredibly interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. We'd love to double down in the panel session potentially on some of those sort of adoption trends that you sort of started talking about there. But I will I'll jump into a couple of questions for Husayn, if that's all right. We'll hopefully be able to come back to Emilia afterwards. So we'd love to get a few perspectives, Husayn, about everything you're building with Quench. You've referenced the coach a few times. We'd love to understand, you know, how are users responding to the AI role play experience that you've been simulating, and what can you share about the direction you'd like to take regarding the kind of role play experience that you're integrating for people using your platform?
So the role play is one feature, and it helps insofar as we recognize early on that if you have good content, even delivered via an AI coach or even a human coach, that is good, but it's not sufficient, and that people need to really that learn best by putting it into practice, and then thinking through what can be achieved as far as helping people put what they've learned into practice in a scalable way that we can control for quality and essentially deliver something that's repeatable. The natural one was role play. So in essence, it's V1 of this feature, where it can be a 90-minute training session or a 100-page report or whatever it may be. You sort of do the commands that I want to do a role play. You configure a few things, and then you're off into it. It could be on a sales call. I'm getting grilled on price, yet I really can't discount further. I've got 15 minutes. Let's go. That's the kind of thing. And it works well, especially when the user knows what their outcome is. Like they can say, okay, I want to emphasize on optimizing for like negotiation, or I want to give feedback to a colleague who's always late on Zoom. That's a clear outcome, and then you can work towards that. When it's more open-ended role play, okay, how do I do good customer calls? That's where you can't really easily measure what the outcome is. So that's been a learning from the role play.
Awesome. And you referenced sales as sort of one area. I mean, what are some of the other areas that you're finding, particular interest in trying in that sort of particular strand of your product?
So our just general product is actually discovery of content, in that I am in the flow of work and I need to find something. But what we do well is when we are querying across like a very large data set, where it can be a consulting firm, a law firm, professional services, or a training provider with a lot of like educational content, where I know what I'm after, but I don't have 20, 30 minutes to go through files and folders and try to find something. So that essentially I run a query around how can I best present to a bank in Australia that is sensitive on like response time. And then we then pull the results out and we give the references and sources and citations everywhere that we've pulled this result and this answer from, so that you can get your answer straight away. And then should you want to, there's like the insights with it. And then finally, these are the sources that have come as a result. So that is what we found as our first products, is what we can actually measure insofar as what your intent is and what we give you as a result. And we'll ask you afterwards, is this the relevant result or not? Like what we can't control is, does it solve your problem? Because that's down to the content and so forth. What we can control is this relevant or not? And in essence, most of our clients start by playing with like an LLM, OpenAI or similar. They quickly realize that these are probabilistic models, and that over a large corpus content, they're not always quite accurate in pulling what you have in mind. Whereas what we do, we're LLM agnostic. Our models are essentially go beyond LLMs to have a semantic understanding of the content. So when we understand your intent, we can actually much more accurately pull the relevant thing. Now that you have that content, should you want to initiate things on top of that, one of them is a role play in order to then put that into practice.
Yeah, got you. Awesome. And so, when we sort of were perusing your current sort of public facing offering, we could see some of the offers that you mentioned in your introduction, for solopreneurs, for education providers with their own content, and then for companies looking to train their employees more effectively generally. How are you finding sort of appetite varying among these three use cases, or what are you able to share around?
Yeah, of course. When we went in, we had a discovery product, and we had sort of like an AI coach. So create a clone of your content to spin off an AI coach. We were expecting the AI coach to do well and the discovery not to do, and it kind of turned out to be the other way around. And that AI coach is, in essence, as sort of we just heard from Emilia, you really need to pick a vertical. It's usually domain expertise is needed. Sometimes it might be a proprietary database, and it takes a lot of fine tuning to deliver something that's really, really performance. And so our initial promise to training providers is, hey, we can just take your content and spin off a AI coach, which just basically didn't deliver anywhere near to what we had thought was possible. And therefore, so that is what has not worked. What has worked is this ability to help their users much more quickly find the relevant content that they want, and therefore increase their engagement and hopefully their learning experience.
And the most of those companies that you're working with, I mean, what kind of profile or size are they, or is there a real sort of broad gap?
There's a range, but the bulk tends to be edtechs who are essentially have hundreds, if not thousands, of users, and those users typically want to go and find something specific, and we now sort of enable their content library to be queried more effectively. And our approach, and basically what we've been asked and what we're going to come to next year, is as we go into organization, not training providers, but organizations, professional services and others, and we help them query their internal knowledge base better. As and when they want to, we'll plug in different AI coaches, you can say, but they'd be coming in as partners. And so we become essentially somewhat of a marketplace for AI coach vertical specific best in class to be able to deploy via us. But that is what we've been asked to do and what we intend to do, but we've not done it. That's for next year.
Super cool, and thank you for your openness regarding your product roadmap generally. It's very interesting, and yeah, best of luck with all of it. I mean, we'll certainly sort of come back to you shortly in the panel session, but love to ask Catalin a few questions before we do that.
Sure.
So Catalin, your you know, at the core of the Ello product is your AI engine, which you call it adaptive learn.
I think people call it, yeah.
What were some of the unique challenges in developing in the model for that effectively is able to adapt the learning needs, adaptive learning needs and paces of young children?
Yeah, sure. I mean, with learning to read, honestly, the first really hard thing was just chat speech recognition. It's super hard, right? And that's like the main barrier to entry that we faced. We tried using Alexa, Google Cloud, and like other stuff out of the box to, you know, track children reading, and basically none of it worked. And so we had to build our own, and we've had to build our own data set. We've had to acquire data, and eventually we hired some of the people who wrote one of the defining speech papers of the decade, a model called Wave to Back, learning self-supervised way, sort of similar to the way language models do now. And our child speech recognition models now outperform OpenAI's Whisper and sort of everything else that we know of at the specific task of both transcribing and tracking chat speech. And so I think a lot of people forget about that piece. People sort of look at ChatGPT and they're like, oh, it's a teacher. I'm like, yeah, sort of, but the right interface for it isn't text, right? Their kids are not going to hand it a bullet point list of their, you know, write a good prompt or something. That's just not happening. So the right interface is probably closer to, you know, an elephant that talks to you. And so, you know, we had to make that work. We had to make it work. Emilia mentioned accents, right, at the phoneme level for kids of all backgrounds. And so, you know, we collect diverse data from our customers. We send a subset of them surveys where we ask them to voluntarily report race, ethnicity, accent, country of origin, background, age. Do you have a speech and language pathology issue, which like close to 25% of our customers do, at least the ones that respond to the surveys, which is really striking. And how well does Ello understand your child on a scale from 1 to 10, right? And so then we have the tools to both measure accuracy disparity and track bias along the way, and improve on it by upsampling the right data.
Very interesting, and I guess linked to the fact that you've decided that Ello is an elephant. You know, one thing to sort of be accurate and effective from the pedagogical perspective, but it's quite another to build something fully digital that is able to keep young learners engaged and motivated. We'd love to hear a bit about how you've managed to do that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the reason we're a consumer business. I think there are lots of other people like starting with schools and trying to get in through districts and doing this sort of ball game. And our fear is always that that takes us further away from the customer and ultimately the end user. So the end user is a child. We sell to their parent. That's already one step removed. And so we want to be as close to the child as possible. I mean, we have them in our office, like at this point, honestly, on an almost daily basis. We have a room where we've got like playtesting set up and cameras and GoPros and that kind of stuff. And then I have a co-founder, Dr. Elizabeth Adams, who's a clinical child psychologist, who knows a whole lot about motivational psychology. And so, yeah, of course, you know, you do the stuff that like other consumer founders also do. You earn stars and prizes and, you know, you build habits and you do those sorts of things because they work. And so, you know, you get stars for reading the words, you can dress up your elephant in like a great costume and like this kind of stuff. And like that, of course, makes sense. There are different reading modalities in Ello that are sort of quite engaging, and some of them you can like take turns with Ello and that kind of stuff. You just have to remember like who our end customer is right now. You know, half of kids go for school and they maybe sort of just pick it up in a, they learn to read in a 30-person classroom setting. And then the other half, like, really, that doesn't work for them. And they tend to become reluctant readers, right? Like sort of kids who like hate reading. They don't want to read out loud in front of, you know, their parents or their grandparents when they come over or that kind of thing. They develop an aversion to it. And so you got to break through that. And the way you break through that is by creating privacy. Child can, you know, take the tablet and hide in their bedroom and talk to Ello, and Ello is non-judgmental and always in a good mood. And the way you break through that is by making the experience fun. So one of the ways we now do that is you can read about whatever you want to read about. So you can create essentially your own story with Ello, which is, you know, written using Gen AI models as well. And so, you know, if you want the story of whatever it is that would like psych you out as a child and make you want to read, like dinosaur playing basketball with LeBron James. Okay, sure, we can make the story about that, right? And then Ello narrates the hard parts and the child reads the easy parts. And so we sort of, once we get over that place where the flip has switched, it's sort of that's like the magical moment, right? When parents see that, and kid who used to cry going to read comes back and is like, I love reading. Can I spend more time with Ello? It's like, all right, cool, we did it. And so that's sort of the KPI. And then we're like, okay, yeah, 2-week engagement, and we focus on that and optimizing that.
Also, and so when a child is you know, deciding what they want to read about, or you know, the story that's being created, is that all sort of self-driven by them? Is it sort of a prompt system regarding sort of what they might be interested in, or how does that sort of work?
Yeah, it's a bit steered still, right? Of course, because we tried stuff where they could come in and literally talk to the elephant about anything, and figured that for various reasons, including safety, we weren't quite ready for that. And you also sort of have this like white paper problem. Like you ask a child, what do you want to do? They get a little overwhelmed. If you ask them, which one of these 3 things do you want to do? Do you want to go to the zoo? Or do you want to do this? Or do you want to do that? And it's like, okay, that's a bit more manageable. And so we do a similar thing. It's like, who do you want the main character of your story to be? Do you want it to be a dinosaur or a girl going to school or like whatever? And then they get to choose, you know, where do you want it to take place? We sort of restructure it a bit.
Nice. Yeah, I've noticed there's quite a few new children's books that are being released along the lines of tell your own story, and it's a bit like Black Mirror, where you can kind of, you know, or I think it's Black Mirror. It was one of the Netflix series where you can choose your own path, you know, A or B, and it's that kind of thing. It is, I guess, it's the sort of that they've created a book version of it, which I guess is not quite as flexible as what you've built, I guess, but also kind of interesting to see traditional players trying to sort of innovate in a similar way, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess you've mentioned that your primary customer base at the moment is parents. But how did you get around or address any concerns they had regarding the use of AI in early education, and what kind of strategies have proven effective on that front for you?
Yeah, I think ultimately there is going to be some divide, and there's going to be, of course, some parents who are just no technology, never whatsoever. Honestly, it tends to be more privileged parents who can sort of afford to figure out how to, make that happen and have the time to spend with their child. But I think the vast majority of parents we found are, yeah, certainly once they hit their second or third child and they're just kind of out of time, it's like, does the kid watch YouTube or TV? Or can we have them do something good? And so if we can persuade them that this is something good, I think they tend to be quite open to it. We try to do that in a number of ways. We give parents choice wherever possible, right? We currently work entirely offline. So if you want to, you can run Ello in sort of a privacy-preserving fashion, disconnected from the internet, and all the speech recognition runs on device. I don't know if that's going to remain that way forever, to be honest. Because there's some exciting stuff that we want to do that requires connecting to the internet, but we will give parents choice over whether they want to do that or not. We ask them to share whether they have to opt into any type of data sharing right now. I was surprised to see that 60% of them do, as sort of like a, privacy conscious German coming to the US. I was totally shocked. There's like, nobody's going to get opt-in, we're not going to get any data, and people seem quite open to it. And then we put, we're about to put a statement on our website, which is sort of, as I mentioned before, right? Like we track and measure accuracy disparity and these sorts of things. It's like, yeah, all AI models are biased. Ours is biased in some ways, right? And it's just in the training data, there's more white male voices with the Queen's English or sort of vanilla American accents than not, and we're working hard to fix that. But hopefully along the way we can actually tell you how biased we are, and you can make informed decisions. And then we've got now more and more we're looking into sort of the standard side of this as well. So Common Sense Media is the US organization that does sort of all the film and movie ratings. They now have an AI rating, and we were part of their inaugural AI rating, as sort of they rated 10 apps, and including ChatGPT, on like how child safe they are. And Ello was sort of one of the two that, we're the only ones that were reasonably child safe out there. And so we're gonna try to stay on top of that. But I think long term, it's going to happen, and parents are going to want to have it happen because the upside is just so high.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I wonder if, when you say you're expecting a lower portion of parents to opt into the data sharing, I think Emilia was sharing in the comments that they had sort of a similar experience.
Yeah, crazy.
But yeah, I guess part of it comes down to, well, not part of it, but potentially it's the behavioral change that's coming into be because of all the, people constantly discovering new websites, clicking, accepting cookies, and therefore understanding that, it's just part of the puzzle now that people have access to different bits of data about you, and you of course can kind of control some of it to a point. But if in doubt, it's if you trust that Ello and Thymia and Quench are using your data in a responsible way to improve things, then it's obviously an easier decision to let that happen. But that was really interesting. I'd love to bring back Husayn and Emilia so we can jump into a bit of a panel, and a quick reminder that if you do have questions in the audience, please feel free to share them. Hello again. We'd love to hear a bit about the competitive landscape in each of your areas. How is competition sort of shaping your direction of travel? Because of course, there's what you're working on are such compelling challenges that obviously other people are also looking at them. We have to know sort of how you're sort of seeing the competitive landscape in each of your areas, and also what you think you need to do to stay competitive going forward. And potentially we could start with Emilia, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe I'm inspired a bit about what I heard from Quench and Ello as well. I think one of the main things we're working on right now is around AI transparency. So it's about not just building the best model that you can, but being transparent about its limitations and how it performs, how it behaves. And instead of quoting some insane accuracy, quote unquote, statistics of like 90% and above, 99%, if I just look at this very, one part of the data that is, white, male, middle-aged, then yeah, great, it's 99%. If I then look at women who are Black, who grew up in this area, is going to be terrible. So I think being transparent about performance and identifying what is the right metric to convey that trust or to that transparency to people, not just clinicians, but also investors and users and anybody else who wants to interact with this. We think that's like really, really key moving forward. We did this like whole AI task force on user safety, but also, this transparency, what actually conveys what we're building. And we found some very interesting things that we're now trying to create like AI standards around in terms of what you should be reporting against, what are those benchmarks, how do you report, how do you dissect by group so that you are showing bias if there is bias, and what are you doing to overcome that bias, and so on. So I think that is super important, and I see that as something we're doing better than a lot of competitors out there, for us at least. And then for us, the key thing that still is a differentiator for Thymia is really multimodality. So combining voice with video and behavior, we're now actually expanding to include wearable device data. Hopefully by the end of the year, that will include, that will bring in physical metrics that are more accurate than we could ever measure, such as step count and so on. But also kind of harder ground truths like EEG headset data, which you can use to look at fatigue in a more kind of direct way alongside sleep, and using that to train specific symptoms and get better and better at symptom-driven analysis rather than condition-driven, because ultimately conditions are actually treating the symptoms rather than the conditions in mental health. So I guess, yeah.
That's awesome. So basically keep winning on the science.
Yeah, keep winning on the science, but also communication.
Yes.
We could sit here and say, we're the best. And we did that with some of the big pharma companies. We then spent 6 months explaining what being the best means to mathematicians in their team, to XYZ. And like, we have an R score of this. And the mathematicians are like, that doesn't sound very high. I'm like, okay, wait. In this context, it is really high. And look at this. Yes, okay. So it's about learning how to explain it to the right people as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And Husayn, does that sort of ring true for you in terms of how you're sort of thinking about Quench maintaining an advantage? Is it all around sort of the quality of the technical innovations that you're putting together, or how else are you looking to stay on top?
You're right in terms of what your claim is. So our claim is that we're the most for tailored precision and reasoning. We're the best in the learning context. So in that, our primary competition, the perceived competition, is Microsoft's sort of OpenAI or Google's product or similar, and that is relatively easy to test on a corpus of content, run these queries, see the results, and compare it to us, and you can see why the reasoning is sort of, we say, superior. And that helps when you, so this is what we're doing is a little bit easier to demonstrate, and that is quite helpful if it's accepted that what you're optimizing for is sort of tailored precision. But generally, we have incumbents that are sort of in the same space, and some have been going for a decade. And so part of, I guess, Gen AI startups in particular, the pitch is, especially as we are working to get sort of very large consulting firms, very large banks, we don't have any yet, but we're working on it. We sort of explain to say, are you betting that a Gen AI native company is going to solve this? Yes or no? If it's a yes, then by definition, that company is only going to be 2 years old, right? And if you fast forward 5 years, the winner is going to be either formed in the previous 24 months or the next 12 months. It's going to come from this window. And therefore, go to your procurement teams and explain to them, guys, the normal rules should not apply. We shouldn't go through all these sort of compliance hoops, because by the time we do that, our competitors are going to take over if we don't sort of implement Gen AI native solutions. And I can't yet say that has worked because, again, we've not yet signed one, sort of these large ones, but they're receptive to that, and it seems to make sense.
Awesome. Well, hopefully it's possible to close some of those soon and prove that you're right. And Catalin, your sort of competitive landscape, how are you seeing that?
Yeah, so we haven't had honestly such a competitor in exactly the same space and on the consumer side. We've had some competitors try to do a very similar thing in schools, but as I mentioned earlier, you sort of end up building a different product because you have a different customer. If you go to schools and you talk about reading, the main thing they're worried about is assessment, right? It's how can I get kids tested as quickly as possible, and so a lot of people go in that direction. In general, I'm not so afraid of established companies. Maybe the one that I really respect is Duolingo in this area and in their ability to stay sort of quite nimble and build in the consumer space. But it's scary. We now go to these sorts of edtech events. I mean, you feel it a bit less on Zoom, but you go to these things, in person, and it's like, oh, we're like one of the ones now. That's terrifying. And because, we were always the small one and that was like nobody knew and was trying to talk to people and figure it out. And to think that, we're the ones who have gotten this golden ticket to go try to build AI tutors, feels like an immense responsibility, to be honest. And so I tend to be more afraid of young companies coming up being super unconstrained and just blazing through on conviction alone and doing something crazy. And so, the field's changing so quickly, technology-wise. We just keep up with it. We, for better or worse, we build a lot of new shit all the time, and sometimes to a fault. But it's sort of I'm more afraid of innovative dilemma than death, I guess. And so it's sort of very much willing to to keep evolving the product as capabilities come online.
It sounds like you were more stressed out by the idea of being identified as one of the leaders than pleased to be one of the leaders.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, awesome. So a final question with the last 5 minutes before we wrap up. But because, as Sabrina mentioned, of our campaign and the work we've done to identify what's at the leading edge of AI at the moment, what's likely to be coming next, and also some of the adoption plans. We'd love to hear your perspective on areas of EdTech and wider learning outside of your sort of current purview that you think is particularly ripe for disruption by AI, and potentially we can mix up the order this time and go to Husayn first, if that's okay.
The contextualization of content and making that relevant is a key part, because normally you have to, typically in a startup environment, you rely on a colleague or a manager or someone else. Personalization of learning is in many ways, and has been, the sort of Achilles heel in learning, which is now solvable. And that means making it more accessible to more people across the world. In many ways, you could think of maybe the internet as akin to sort of placing a library in front of a village of 1,000 people in sort of where low literacy rates. And now Gen AI is actually like placing 10 teachers in there that can take the library and take the content and make it accessible to people. We all know that essentially helps people learn. I'd say those are the two main ones. You may be on mute.
Doing so well. Thank you for that. I think we could go to Catalin next on the area that you think is most ripe for disruption outside of Ello's core area of operation.
Ello's core area of operations. I mean, I'm personally quite excited about obviously about multimodality, right? And so we think one of the bigger opportunities for that is young kids, because they don't type, and so I think that branches, beyond reading, certainly, as a subject. It's just yeah, you have the ability to build things that you can talk to, and quite honestly, across like most of technology, it's almost like it's like we're in this phase of living in this, like, what now looks to someone who sort of knows what these models can do, like a very transient, antiquated world, right? Like the fact that I'm like have this thing in my pocket, and like the fact that I can't get into my car and start talking to it is just why not? That should work now. And so it's like that probably changes the way that that an app works eventually across the board, right? And so that's just probably true across like most areas of learning.
Typical. Sabrina, I hope we are making note of these for the relevant articles. And then Emilia, to close us out, what's the area that you find most interesting at the moment?
Yeah, I think I'll probably be a bit biased. Like I can't help come from it from a mental health perspective, always do these things. But I think the idea of hyper-personalization per individual learner, whatever their age is, but particularly younger learners, the ability to create adaptive AI models that customize to them, not just in terms of how they speak or in terms of how they look, how they behave, how they learn, but really it's about customizing to their unique learning style. And that includes also neurodiversity and ability to create custom learning schedules and methods, etc., that actually adapt to that neurodiversity. I think that is really going to unlock the future of education for so many people, and so many people who were blocked in the past will actually be given that access in a different way to what we think of as kind of accessible for people in remote regions. It's also making it accessible for people in, what would normally be an accessible region, but they're not accessible because of their neurodiversity and other issues holding them back that shouldn't really.
That's fascinating, and that whole discussion has been really enjoyable for us. So thank you very much for being so open, and also for sharing all of your perspectives. As I mentioned at the start, the session will be written up and available on our platforms in the coming couple of weeks. The festival continues tomorrow with sessions on people, focused on hiring for international expansion, which should be very interesting. And then the second one is going to be on growth and on one of the companies that Catalin mentioned, on Duolingo, and how it grew from 3 million to 200 million users. So details of those sessions, if you signed up, will be shared via email and with reminders on social media. So we hope to see you there. But for now, thank you very much to Emilia, to Husayn and Catalin for joining. Really great. So yeah, we hope to stay in touch, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.